The first case is Derek Ephraim Condon, a 39-year-old intruder in rural Idaho. It is just after 2 a.m. in rural Bingham County, Idaho, in March 2024. A lone homeowner is asleep when 39-year-old Derek Condon forces his way into the house. He is described by investigators as an intruder with a weapon. The residents inside are an elderly occupant and a family member who required assistance, and they are suddenly confronted in their own home. Condon broke in through a side door and moved through the house carrying a knife. Neighbors later said they heard shouting and a disturbance. The intruder made threats and advanced toward the occupants, raising the stakes for everyone inside. The situation escalated quickly, and the household feared imminent harm. The homeowner grabbed a legal firearm and confronted Condon to protect a vulnerable family member. A confrontation followed in a living area, and at least one defensive shot was fired. Paramedics were called immediately, and deputies secured the scene. Condon did not survive the encounter and was pronounced dead at the scene. Local law enforcement treated the case as a defensive shooting while they gathered evidence and interviewed witnesses. Investigators collected physical evidence and reviewed security footage and 911 calls to verify the sequence of events. No immediate charges were filed against the homeowner, pending review by the county prosecutor. By the time deputies completed their on-scene work, the intruder was dead, and investigators treated the shooting as self-defense. The next case is D'Angelo Murphy, a 29-year-old intruder in Gulfport, Mississippi. This incident occurred in Gulfport, Mississippi in December 2025. Authorities say D'Angelo Murphy was subject to an active protective order involving the people inside the home. The occupants included a person who had previously taken legal steps to keep Murphy away, and they were at home when he arrived late at night. Murphy allegedly forced his way to the residence and attempted to gain entry despite the protective order. Reports indicate he pushed on doors and windows and threatened the residents verbally and physically. The presence of the protective order made the encounter particularly tense, as the occupants feared an escalation. Neighbors called police after hearing the disturbance. One resident retreated to a secure part of the house and contacted emergency services, while another armed themselves and confronted Murphy at the doorway. A brief confrontation followed, and at least one defensive shot was fired as Murphy advanced. He was struck and did not survive the encounter, and emergency personnel pronounced him dead at the scene. Police described the initial response as an investigation into a possible self-defense shooting, and the protective order was a central piece of the inquiry. Prosecutors reviewed the evidence and witness statements to determine whether the homeowner acted lawfully. The household was not publicly charged while the investigation continued. By the time medical personnel cleared the scene, the intruder had been declared dead. The next case is Rodney Lee Martin, a 41-year-old burglar in rural California. This event took place in a rural area outside Modesto, California on July 2, 2021. Rodney Lee Martin was described by police as a suspect in a burglary who approached a residence late in the evening. The occupants were a lone homeowner on the property who encountered Martin during his attempt to enter. Martin reportedly forced entry, and a gunfight ensued between him and the homeowner. Both men exchanged fire inside or near the entryway, according to law enforcement accounts. The exchange of gunfire escalated the confrontation from a break-in to a lethal encounter. Neighbors called 911 after hearing multiple shots. The homeowner cooperated with responding deputies and said he fired in fear for his life. Martin was struck during the exchange and later died either at the scene or shortly after being transported by ambulance. Investigators recovered multiple shell casings and took witness statements to reconstruct the sequence. Sheriff investigators treated the episode as an armed confrontation and opened a formal shooting investigation. Authorities reviewed ballistic evidence and coordinated with the county prosecutor to determine whether the homeowner's actions met the legal standard for self-defense. At the close of the initial inquiry, the intruder had died and the shooting was under review by prosecutors. The next case is Pearl Fierro, a 32-year-old woman who smashed her way into a Modesto home. This incident occurred in Modesto, California on June 29, 2021. Pearl Fierro is reported to have forced entry into a family residence during the early morning hours. The occupants included household members who were awakened and confronted by her unexpected entry. Fierro broke glass and forced open a door to get inside, and witnesses say she behaved aggressively once she was in the home. She was not known to the family as an invited guest, and she carried a makeshift weapon according to responding officers. The situation escalated rapidly as she moved through the living areas. a resident armed themselves and confronted Fierro in an attempt to protect the family. A single defensive shot was fired during the confrontation, and Fierro was struck. Emergency services responded and attempted resuscitation, but she did not survive and was pronounced dead at the scene. Police opened a homicide investigation and treated the incident as a possible justifiable use of force while they gathered evidence. Investigators interviewed family members and canvassed neighbors for video and statements. Prosecutors reviewed the facts, and the household was not immediately charged during the initial inquiry. Paramedics rushed her to the scene, and she was pronounced dead there. The next case is Jorge Nestevan Flores Toledo, a 33-year-old intruder in Lakewood Ranch in Bradenton, Florida. This case took place on December 26, 2024 in the Lakewood Ranch and Bradenton area of Florida. Jorge Nestevan Flores Toledo was reported to have forced entry into a suburban home on Christmas night. The residents inside were a family spending the holiday at home when the break-in occurred. Flores Toledo broke a lock and entered through a rear door, and witnesses said he ignored warnings to leave. He was alleged to be attempting a robbery or confrontation, and at least one resident felt immediately threatened. The intrusion sparked a rapid and violent encounter between intruder and occupants. A homeowner confronted the intruder and a defensive shooting occurred during the struggle. Emergency crews arrived and transported Flores Toledo to a hospital, but he died soon after from his wounds. Police secured the scene and began collecting evidence to understand the exchange. Manatee County investigators described the case as a defensive shooting under review and gathered witness statements and physical evidence. Prosecutors considered the context of the break-in and the actions of both the intruder and the homeowner before making charging decisions. The intruder was taken to a hospital and later died from his injuries. The next case is Abednego Andre, a 28-year-old intruder in Granada Hills, Los Angeles, California. This incident happened in Granada Hills in December 2023. Abednego Andre was reported to have shown up at a residence where he had a prior dispute with someone inside, and police records note previous protective orders or contacts. The occupants were a homeowner and a relative who feared an escalation when Andre appeared. Andre forced his way into the property, breaking a door and entering the home. He confronted the occupants and was described by witnesses as aggressive and uncooperative. The confrontation escalated when the homeowner attempted to push Andre out and to call 911. A defensive confrontation ended with at least one shot fired by a resident who said they feared for their safety. Andre was struck and later died either at the scene or after being taken to emergency care. Officers on scene secured the home and detained anyone involved for questioning. Los Angeles police opened an investigation and reviewed body camera footage and forensic evidence to determine whether the use of force was lawful. The prior protective order and prior contacts were part of the prosecutor review. At the end of the initial investigation, investigators reported the intruder had died and the case was under review. The next case is Jensen Rojas Marrero, a 24-year-old intruder in Fayetteville, North Carolina. This event took place in Fayetteville in September 2019. Jensen Rojas Marrero entered an occupied residence late at night and surprised a homeowner. The occupant was alone and responded to the threat in the moment. Rojas Marrero is reported to have forced a window or door to gain access and to have confronted the resident inside. The intruder carried a weapon according to police statements and threatened the homeowner. The encounter left the resident fearing imminent harm and seeking to stop the attack. The homeowner fired a defensive shot as Rojas Marrero advanced, and the intruder was struck. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but Rojas Marrero did not survive and was declared dead at the scene. Investigators recovered evidence and spoke with neighbors to confirm the timeline. Cumberland County law enforcement described the shooting as a self-defense investigation while they reviewed the evidence. Prosecutors examined whether the homeowner acted reasonably under the circumstances and no immediate charges were filed. By the time detectives cleared the scene, the intruder had been pronounced dead. The next case is Shelby Hurd, a 37-year-old burglar in Joliet, Illinois. This incident occurred in Joliet on August 15, 2025. Shelby Hurd was described as a repeat offender with prior burglary convictions and a recent history of parole violations. The homeowner encountered Hurd during a forced entry in the evening hours. Hurd broke into the residence through a front window and moved into the living areas, according to police. The homeowner, awakened by noise, confronted Hurd and a struggle followed. The intruder was allegedly attempting to steal or threaten occupants when the confrontation escalated. A defensive shot was fired by the homeowner during the altercation, and Hurd was struck and later pronounced dead. Police detained the homeowner briefly for questioning and collected evidence from the scene. The community discussed the case in light of Hurd's prior criminal history and the risk faced by ordinary residents. Will County investigators treated the incident as a defensive shooting and forwarded their findings to the prosecutor for review. The homeowner cooperated with authorities, and witness statements were consistent with a forced entry scenario. Paramedics transported Hurd, and he died soon after from his wounds. The next case is the Milwaukee shower intruder, an unnamed man in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This case took place in Milwaukee in August 2022. A resident discovered an unknown man inside his home, reportedly in a bathroom or shower area in the middle of the day. The homeowner said the intruder had entered without permission and appeared to be stealing or hiding inside the house. The intruder was confronted by the homeowner, and a physical struggle occurred as the intruder tried to flee. Neighbors called police after hearing the disturbance, and the homeowner said he feared for his safety during the encounter. An exchange of force ended the confrontation. The homeowner fired a shot to stop the intruder, and the man was struck and pronounced dead at the scene by responding emergency personnel. Milwaukee police secured the house and began a homicide investigation to determine whether the shooting was justified. Investigators reviewed video and interviewed witnesses as part of the inquiry. City detectives described the shooting as a defensive encounter under investigation, and no immediate charges were announced while they reviewed the evidence. The intruder was dead when paramedics arrived, and officers continued to collect statements from neighbors. The next case is the Harrington Park intruder in Harrington Park, Sydney, Australia. This incident occurred in Harrington Park, a suburb of Sydney, in February 2019. A man forced entry into a private home late at night and was confronted by the occupants. The encounter became a physical struggle inside the house. According to police, occupants overpowered the intruder and restrained him until emergency services arrived. The struggle involved multiple people in the home and lasted several minutes as they sought to prevent further harm. Neighbors reported hearing shouting and a commotion before police were called. The intruder suffered injuries during the restraint, and emergency personnel attempted resuscitation on scene. He was pronounced dead after officers and paramedics completed their intervention. New South Wales police launched a homicide investigation to establish the cause of death and the circumstances of the restraint. Australian authorities conducted a coroner review and interviewed the household members who were involved in detaining the intruder. The matter was treated as a serious death in custody, and parts of the legal process differed from U.S. cases because of local law. By the time the coroner completed the initial review, the intruder had died, and investigators were examining whether the occupants acted in lawful self-defense. These 10 cases share difficult common threads. Intruders entered homes at night or unexpectedly, often armed or threatening, and ordinary people were suddenly forced to make life and death decisions to protect themselves or loved ones. In every story, one choice to break into a home ended in the death of the intruder, and in many cases, residents were left traumatized or injured by the experience. These incidents raise complicated questions about self-defense, home protection, and the legal standards that govern use of force. They also highlight the human cost on both sides when violence replaces non-violent options. What do you think about these cases, and how would you respond if faced with a similar threat? The first case is Derek Ephraim Condon, a 39-year-old intruder in rural Idaho. It's just after 2 in the morning on March 13, 2024, in a quiet patch of Bingham County, Idaho. 85-year-old Christine Janayan and her disabled adult son are asleep inside their rural home. Without warning, Derek Ephraim Condon forces open the back door. He is holding a knife. There is no known connection between Condon and the family. He is a stranger with a criminal record for theft and drug offenses, but no clear motive for choosing this house. This is a disturbing intrusion into an otherwise quiet household. Yanayan wakes to the sound of breaking wood and hurried footsteps. She retrieves a handgun from a bedside drawer and calls 911, whispering her location. Condon moves deeper into the house, knife in hand, and advances down the hallway. Janayan stands her ground and warns him to stop, but he keeps coming. She fires multiple times, and Condon collapses in the hallway and dies at the scene before deputies arrive. The encounter escalates from forced entry to a lethal confrontation in a matter of moments. Bingham County Sheriff's deputies secure the house and begin an investigation. The coroner determines Condon's death resulted from gunshot wounds. Detectives find no evidence that he knew the family or had any reason to be there. The sheriff's office cites Idaho's castle doctrine as the legal backdrop for residents defending themselves against armed intruders. The county prosecutor reviews the evidence and declines to file charges, citing the homeowner's right to defend her life and her son. By the time deputies finish their work, the case is ruled a justifiable homicide under Idaho law. The next case is D'Angelo Murphy, a 29-year-old intruder in Gulfport, Mississippi. On a December night in 2025, neighbors reported disturbance at a modest Gulfport home where a protective order was already in place against the intruder. D'Angelo Murphy had recently been the subject of complaints and was known to the household as a former acquaintance with a history of violent behavior. The people inside were a woman who had obtained the protective order and her adult partner. Tension is high because the order meant the homeowner expected the intruder to stay away. Murphy returned late and forced entry through a back door, pushing past a screen and breaking a lock. He carried a small knife and shouted threats toward the residents. He allegedly banged on doors and demanded to see one of the occupants, ignoring warnings to leave. At one point, he attempted to seize a phone from a counter and threatened to hurt anyone who called the police. The situation moved quickly from harassment to an imminent threat. The homeowner and her partner retreated to a bedroom and dialed 911, then confronted Murphy when he entered the hall. A physical struggle followed, and the homeowner's partner fired a single defensive shot. Murphy collapsed in the hallway and died at the scene. Neighbors later described the episode as terrifying and chaotic. Police treated the incident initially as a possible self-defense case and secured the scene. Investigators noted the prior protective order as relevant background. Prosecutors examined the evidence and witness statements and ultimately determined the shooting was within the rights of self-defense under Mississippi law. By the time officers cleared the scene, the intruder was dead, and authorities classified the shooting as self-defense. The next case is Rodney Lee Martin, a 41-year-old burglar in rural California. On July 2, 2021, in a rural area outside Modesto, California, a homeowner discovered an unfamiliar man moving around the property after midnight. Rodney Lee Martin was described as a transient with several prior burglary convictions. The house was occupied by a lone resident who had been sleeping downstairs. The encounter happened on a quiet lane where residents relied on locks and alarms to feel safe. Martin attempted to force open a sliding glass door and then climbed through an unlocked window when the door resisted. He was carrying a handgun and appeared ready to take property from the home. The homeowner confronted Martin as he moved through the living room, and a rapid exchange of words escalated into gunfire. Both men fired, and the homeowner sustained non-life-threatening wounds while Martin was struck multiple times. Neighbors called 911 and deputies arrived to find the homeowner being treated at the scene and Martin badly wounded. Paramedics attempted to save Martin and transported him to a nearby hospital, where he later died from his injuries. The shooting occurred after an exchange of gunfire rather than a one-sided defensive shot. The county sheriff opened a homicide investigation and collected evidence from the scene, including shell casings and surveillance footage. Investigators reviewed the homeowner's statements about fearing for his life and his account of being shot. Prosecutors considered the circumstances of the exchange of gunfire and ultimately treated the case within the context of self-defense laws and the homeowner's account of mutual fire. Paramedics rushed Martin to the hospital, but he died soon after from his wounds. The next case is Pearl Fierro, a 32-year-old woman who smashed her way into a Modesto home. On June 29, 2021, just days before the Rodney Martin incident, a Modesto residence was breached late at night. Pearl Fierro, described by neighbors as known to local police, smashed a side window and forced entry into the family home. The occupants were a married couple and their teenage child who were all inside at the time. The suddenness of the break-in left them with little time to react. Fierro entered carrying a hammer and shouting threats, and she appeared intent on confronting one of the homeowners. She broke through interior doors while yelling and demanded access to the upstairs bedroom. The family told police she behaved aggressively and refused repeated warnings to leave. The escalation was immediate once she moved from outside to inside the living area. The homeowner confronted Fierro in a hallway and fired a single defensive shot. Fierro collapsed and died at the scene. Family members immediately called 911, and cooperating with responding deputies, they provided statements about the threat they perceived and the sequence of events. Modesto police secured the scene and interviewed witnesses and family members. The coroner's report confirmed the cause of death as a gunshot wound. The county prosecutor reviewed the case and determined there was insufficient evidence to charge the homeowner, citing the right to defend one's home against an armed and aggressive intruder. By the time investigators completed their work, the intruder was dead and the shooting was ruled self-defense. The next case is Jorge Nestevan Flores Toledo, a 28-year-old intruder in Lakewood Ranch in Bradenton, Florida. On the afternoon of December 26, 2024, during a holiday period, a break-in was reported at a home in the Lakewood Ranch area near Bradenton, Florida. Jorge Nestevan Flores Toledo was observed on security footage approaching the property and attempting to force open a side door. The homeowners were at home at the time, caring for small children. The timing of the attempted break-in heightened fear for the children and adults inside. Flores Toledo pried at the door with a screwdriver and then attempted to push his way into a kitchen entrance. He was reportedly carrying a small firearm and made threats as he pushed toward the interior. The residents tried to bar the door and shouted for him to leave, but he continued to press forward. At one point, he reached into a tote near the doorway, which the homeowners perceived as reaching for a weapon. A resident fired multiple defensive shots as Flores Toledo moved into the hallway. He was struck and collapsed on the porch area, where bystanders called 911. Paramedics arrived and rushed him to a regional hospital, but he died there from his wounds. The family who fired stated they acted to protect the children and themselves. Sheriff deputies processed surveillance video and witness statements, and the state attorney's office reviewed the shooting. Investigators noted the presence of a weapon and the manner in which Flores Toledo forced entry. Prosecutors treated the shooting as a likely case of self-defense while continuing a formal review. Paramedics transported him to the hospital, but he died soon after from his wounds. The next case is Abednego Audrey, a 34-year-old intruder in Granada Hills, Los Angeles, California. In December of 2023, a late-night disturbance led to a forced entry at a home in the Granada Hills neighborhood of Los Angeles. Abednego Audrey had been the subject of a prior restraining order related to the occupants, according to court records. The house was occupied by a woman who had previously sought protection and a roommate who was home that night. The prior order meant the residents perceived a heightened risk when Audrey returned. Audrey smashed a back door and entered the kitchen area carrying a knife, shouting the name of one occupant. He ignored warnings and attempted to follow the residents as they moved through the house to gather children and valuables. The intruder made explicit threats to harm the residents, and his behavior was reported as aggressive and targeted. The situation escalated rapidly from trespass to a credible threat of violence. One of the residents fired a defensive shot as Audrey advanced toward a bedroom. He fell and was later transported to hospital in critical condition. Despite medical efforts, he later died from his injuries. The residents immediately cooperated with deputies and provided statements about the restraining order and the threat they faced. Los Angeles Police Department detectives treated the incident as a serious use of force and gathered evidence at the scene. Investigators reviewed the existing restraining order and prior contacts between Audrey and the household. The Los Angeles County Prosecutor's Office examined the case in light of self-defense law and the prior threats. He was taken to hospital and later died from his wounds. The next case is Jensen Rojas Marrero, a 27-year-old intruder in Fayetteville, North Carolina. In September of 2019, a middle-of-the-night break-in alarmed a suburban home in Fayetteville. Jensen Rojas Marrero was reported to have forced open a front door and entered the residence while the family slept. The occupants were a family with young children and a single parent who was awake when the intruder entered. The presence of children made the residents especially fearful for their safety. Rojas Marrero kicked the entry door and moved through the living room toward the bedrooms, carrying a small handgun and shouting. The homeowner confronted him in a hallway and ordered him to stop. When the intruder advanced and ignored the commands, the homeowner fired a single defensive shot. The intruder collapsed and was later pronounced dead at a local hospital after emergency crews transported him. Police arrived and secured the scene, collecting the firearm used by the homeowner and interviewing witnesses. The Cumberland County Sheriff's Office treated the case as an apparent self-defense shooting while they completed their examination. Prosecutors reviewed the statements and the physical evidence and declined to press charges, citing the homeowner's account of a clear and present danger. Paramedics transported him to hospital, but he died soon after from his wounds. The next case is Shelby Hurd, a 36-year-old intruder in Joliet, Illinois. On August 15, 2025, a homeowner in Joliet woke to the sound of someone attempting to force a basement window. Shelby Hurd, who had previous convictions and recent parole history, gained access to the property by prying open an entry point. The house was occupied by an older couple who were awake and confronted the intruder. Prior criminal history in the late hour increased the residents' concern. Hurd entered carrying a backpack and a screwdriver and moved toward the living area where the couple was. He threatened the occupants and attempted to grab a set of keys from a hallway table. The husband stepped between Hurd and the rest of the house and warned him to leave. When Hurd advanced toward the couple despite warnings, the husband fired a defensive shot that struck Hurd in the chest. Emergency services were called immediately, and Hurd was transported to a hospital in critical condition. He died there shortly after arrival. Joliet police recorded witness statements and examined the prior record that was cited during the initial report. The surviving homeowners were questioned but released after providing statements. The county prosecutor reviewed evidence including the couple's account of the threat and Hurd's history of property offenses. Investigators concluded the homeowners' actions were consistent with defending the family and home, and no charges were filed. Paramedics took him to the hospital, but he died soon after from his wounds. The next case is the Milwaukee shower intruder, an unidentified man who broke into a home in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in August of 2022. Late one summer night in August 2022, a Milwaukee resident returned to find signs of forced entry and an unknown man inside the house. The intruder made his way into a bathroom and was surprised in the shower by the homeowner. The occupants included the homeowner and a housemate who both called 911 after the confrontation. The unexpected discovery inside the bathroom created a frightening and personal encounter. The intruder had climbed through a window and moved quietly through the house before entering the bathroom. He was unarmed when the homeowner opened the door and confronted him, but his behavior had already alarmed the residents. A physical struggle ensued, and the homeowner used a legally owned firearm to defend against further aggression. The intruder was struck and collapsed in the bathroom. Police arrived and transported the injured man to a hospital where he later died. Detectives processed the scene and reviewed surveillance footage from the neighborhood to confirm the sequence of events. The Milwaukee police treated the matter as a defensive shooting while they investigated further. Because the intruder was unidentified at first, authorities worked to establish his identity and any prior criminal history. Statements from the homeowner and housemate were consistent about an uninvited intruder inside the house at night. Paramedics transported him to the hospital, but he died later from his injuries. The next case is the Harrington Park intruder, an uninvited man who entered a home in the Harrington Park area of Sydney, Australia in February of 2019. On a February night in 2019, residents of a Harrington Park house were awakened by sounds of forced entry. An unknown man had kicked open a rear door and entered the home where a family of 4 was asleep. The parents confronted the intruder in a hallway, and a violent physical struggle followed. This was not a distant crime. It unfolded inside the family living space. The intruder pushed past the parents and attempted to flee with small items, and a scuffle on a hallway landing turned physical. The father and the intruder grappled, and neighbors called emergency services after hearing noises. During the struggle, the intruder sustained severe injuries and collapsed. Paramedics arrived and attempted resuscitation, but he was declared dead at the scene. New South Wales police opened a homicide investigation and treated the case as a serious assault that resulted in death. Detectives interviewed the family and neighbors and collected forensic evidence from the home. A coroner's inquest later examined the circumstances and the degree to which the family's defensive actions contributed to the intruder's death. Police launched a formal investigation after the incident, and the intruder was dead at the scene. These 10 cases share several common features. Most involve intruders entering homes at night, often carrying weapons or behaving in threatening ways. Ordinary people, sometimes with children in the house, were suddenly forced to make split-second decisions about whether to fight back. In each story, one choice to break into a home ended in the intruder's death, and in many cases left residents traumatized or injured. These incidents raise difficult questions about self-defense, home protection, and the legal boundaries of standing your ground. They also underscore the risks of violent crime for both intruders and the people they confront. Which parts of these stories do you find most troubling? And what do you think should change about how communities and the law address home invasion and self-defense? The next case is D'Angelo Murphy, a 29-year-old intruder in Gulfport, Mississippi. At around 7 in the morning, Murphy entered a home where 2 women were living, both of whom had active protective orders against him. According to police reports and local news accounts, he was armed with a hammer and a knife when he forced his way inside. Once inside, Murphy confronted the 2 women. During the struggle, one woman suffered a knife injury, and both women managed to retreat and barricade themselves in another room. The uninjured woman retrieved a firearm while Murphy continued to try to reach them. As the confrontation escalated at the barricaded doorway, she fired at Murphy, striking him. Gulfport police opened an investigation, treating the shooting as a defensive response to a violent break-in. Mississippi law recognizes forced entry into a dwelling as a crime of violence, particularly when protective orders are in place. Local reporting did not indicate that the woman who fired the shot was arrested or charged, and the case appears to have been handled as a likely act of self-defense. Because public records and court documents on this incident remain limited, some details cannot be independently confirmed. He was later pronounced dead by the Harrison County coroner, and authorities treated the shooting as a likely act of self-defense. The next case is Rodney Lee Martin, a 41-year-old burglar in rural California. Just outside Modesto on July 2, 2021, Martin forced his way into a single-story farmhouse. The homeowner was a retired corrections officer who was inside with his spouse. The break-in happened just after midnight. Martin broke a back window and entered the kitchen, setting off a motion alarm. According to initial police reports, he carried a handgun and had a history of burglary arrests in the Central Valley. The homeowner retrieved his own firearm and dialed 911 as he moved to confront the intruder. Inside the darkened house, both men exchanged words before gunfire erupted. Investigators later recovered shell casings from 2 different calibers, one matching the intruder's weapon and one matching the homeowner's. Ballistics teams reconstructed the scene, mapping bullet trajectories through the kitchen and hallway. According to the Modesto Police Department forensic report, Martin fired at least once, striking a cabinet. The homeowner returned fire from behind a kitchen island, hitting Martin twice in the chest. Martin collapsed near the back door and was pronounced dead at the scene by arriving paramedics. Detectives spent hours collecting evidence, photographing spent casings, and interviewing both the homeowner and his spouse. The district attorney reviewed the 911 audio, ballistics evidence, and witness statements before deciding not to file charges. Under California law, deadly force in self-defense is justified when a resident faces an armed intruder and there is no safe avenue of retreat. The case closed with no charges against the homeowner. The next case is Pearl Fierro, a 32-year-old woman who smashed her way into a Modesto home. The next case is Pearl Fierro, a 32-year-old woman who smashed her way into a Modesto, California home on June 29, 2021. It was midday, a time when most people expect safety behind locked doors. According to the Stanislaus County coroner record, Fierro broke a side window to gain entry. The house belonged to a man in his late 50s who was home alone at the time. Police reports did not list any weapon, and neighbors later described her as agitated and determined as she forced her way inside. The homeowner heard the glass shatter and moved to the living room, armed with a legally owned handgun. Fierro stepped through the broken window and advanced further into the house, ignoring repeated warnings to stop. The homeowner fired a single round as a last warning and defensive action. Fierro collapsed just inside the entryway. Emergency medical responders arrived within minutes, but she was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators from the Modesto Police Department processed the scene, documenting the broken window and a single spent shell casing. Detectives interviewed the homeowner and canvassed the neighborhood for witnesses. The Stanislaus County District Attorney reviewed the coroner report and police statements. Under California law, deadly force is justified if a resident reasonably believes they are in imminent danger from an intruder. After reviewing the evidence, the prosecutor determined the homeowner's actions fell within that legal standard. No charges were filed. The case closed with the official finding that the shooting was a justifiable act of self-defense during a forced entry. The next case is Jorge Nestevan Flores Toledo, an intruder in Lakewood Ranch just outside Bradenton, Florida. On December 26, 2024, Flores Toledo forced his way through the front door of a single-family home. The homeowner, a 46-year-old father, was inside with his teenage daughter. According to the Manatee County Sheriff's report, Flores Toledo did not know the family and he brought no weapon, but he ignored repeated warnings to leave. The entry was forced and uninvited, and neighbors later described the visit as unexpected. As Flores Toledo moved further into the house, the homeowner retrieved a legally owned handgun from a bedroom safe. There is no indication Flores Toledo announced a motive. Deputies say he entered uninvited and would not leave when warned. With Flores Toledo closing distance and refusing to stop, the homeowner fired a single defensive shot. Flores Toledo collapsed in the entryway, and paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. Florida's Stand Your Ground law removes any duty to retreat when someone is threatened in their home. The sheriff's office treated the incident as a likely self-defense shooting, and the legal process continued beyond the scene. The homeowner filed a pre-trial motion for immunity, asking a judge to decide whether he was protected from prosecution under the Stand Your Ground statute. In Manatee County, judges routinely hold immunity hearings in home defense shootings, and prosecutors reviewed the evidence, including the forced entry, the warnings, and the single shot. Testimony was heard from both sides, including a self-defense expert for the defense, and after considering the facts, the court granted immunity, barring criminal charges against the resident. No charges were filed, and the shooting was officially classified as a justifiable use of force under Florida's Stand Your Ground law. The next case is Abednego Adre, a 36-year-old man who broke into a home in Granada Hills, Los Angeles, in December 2023. According to LAPD records, Adre was the subject of a standing restraining order filed just weeks earlier by his former partner. On the night of the incident, the home was occupied by the woman and her teenage son. Adre arrived after midnight and attempted to force open the front door, shouting threats while holding a handgun. The restraining order legally barred him from coming within 100 yards of the property. He managed to break through the entryway and then pushed into the house despite the posted court order. The resident quickly dialed 911 and told her son to hide in a back room. She retrieved her own handgun from a locked drawer in the hallway, and when Adre entered, warned him to leave. He continued to advance and raise his weapon, and she fired a single shot that struck him in the chest. He collapsed near the doorway. Paramedics arrived minutes later and transported him to the hospital, but he was pronounced dead on arrival. LAPD detectives documented the scene and reviewed the family court order, which had been issued on December 4, 2023. Investigators treated the shooting as a likely act of self-defense, given the clear violation of the order and the presence of a weapon. No charges were filed against the resident. Trauma counselors later noted that people involved in such incidents often experience lasting psychological effects. The case closed with a finding of justifiable homicide. The next case is Jensen Rojas Marrero, a 23-year-old intruder in Fayetteville, North Carolina. In September 2019, Rojas Marrero forced entry into a small, single-story house just after midnight. The home belonged to an elderly couple who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. Police records indicate Rojas Marrero pried open a side window and entered the living room, triggering the home's alarm system. The couple, awakened by the noise, immediately called 911 while the intruder moved deeper into the house. The male resident retrieved a revolver from a bedroom drawer and warned Rojas Marrero to leave. Ignoring the warning, Rojas Marrero advanced toward the hallway. The homeowner fired 2 shots, striking the intruder. Responding officers arrived within minutes and found Rojas Marrero unresponsive. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. Fayetteville police opened an investigation, collecting evidence and reviewing the homeowner's 911 call. The district attorney's office examined the case, but limited available records make it difficult to reconstruct every detail. No charges were filed against the homeowner, and the district attorney closed the case as a justifiable homicide. The next case is Shelby Hurd, a 27-year-old parolee in Joliet, Illinois. On August 15, 2025, Hurd was out on parole after serving time for multiple burglary convictions. According to state parole board minutes, he had been released less than a year before the incident. That night, Hurd targeted a single-family home on the city's west side, where a middle-aged couple lived alone. He kicked in the side door just after midnight, triggering the home's security alarm and waking the residents. The homeowner immediately called 911 and warned Hurd to leave. As Hurd moved through the kitchen, the resident retrieved a handgun from a locked cabinet. Hurd ignored repeated warnings and advanced further into the house. The homeowner fired once, striking Hurd in the abdomen. Officers arrived within minutes and found Hurd unresponsive. He was transported to a local hospital, where he died from his injuries a few hours later. Will County authorities opened a full investigation, reviewing security footage, 911 audio, and Hurd's parole status. The district attorney's office issued a public statement noting Hurd's recent parole and prior burglary convictions. Prosecutors emphasized that under Illinois law, the use of deadly force can be justified when facing a forcible felony such as home invasion. No charges were filed against the homeowner. The incident drew local attention, with some neighbors describing Hurd's death as a tragic but foreseeable outcome given his record. By the end of the week, officials closed the case, citing the homeowner's right to defend against a known offender during a violent break-in. On an August night in 2022, a Milwaukee homeowner faced a threat that unfolded in one of the most confined spaces possible. The break-in began just after midnight. The intruder, later identified as a man in his early 30s, slipped into the house through an unlocked back door. The homeowner, hearing movement, searched the darkened rooms and found the stranger hiding in the bathroom, crouched behind the shower curtain. With nowhere else to run, the intruder tried to push past, but the homeowner managed to pin him inside the small space. A desperate struggle broke out, with punches, shouts, and the sound of bodies hitting tile. The homeowner overpowered the intruder and held him down, calling 911 with a trembling voice. Dispatchers listened as the homeowner tried to keep the man restrained until help arrived. By the time police and paramedics entered the home, the intruder was unresponsive. According to the medical examiner's summary, he died en route to the hospital, the result of asphyxia during the struggle. Officers at the scene documented the narrow bathroom, the broken curtain rod, and the frantic attempts to revive the man. Wisconsin's castle doctrine protects residents who use force against intruders in their homes, but cases involving restraint and not firearms often draw closer scrutiny. After reviewing the autopsy and 911 audio, authorities classified the death as a result of defensive action during a home invasion. No charges were filed against the homeowner. The next case is the Harrington Park incident in Sydney, Australia, from February 2019. The event began in the early evening when a man attempted to break into a family home. The residents were unarmed and startled by the sound of forced entry, and they confronted the intruder in a narrow hallway. A struggle broke out as the family tried to restrain the man, relying on their own strength rather than weapons. The fight was chaotic and desperate, with the intruder resisting as residents tried to hold him until police could arrive. By the time officers entered the house, the intruder had lost consciousness. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene, the result of asphyxia during the struggle. Investigators from New South Wales Police and the State Coroner's Office examined the incident in detail. Under the Crimes Act 1900, the legal test in New South Wales is one of proportionality, and force used in self-defense must be reasonable and not excessive given the threat faced. Unlike U.S. stand-your-ground laws, New South Wales courts expect residents to use only as much force as is necessary, and to retreat if it is safe to do so. In this case, the coroner reviewed the hallway fight, the absence of weapons, and the residents' attempts to subdue rather than harm. Legal experts noted that Australian law rarely excuses lethal force unless there is an imminent threat of death or serious injury. Ultimately, no charges were filed, but the findings stressed that even in terrifying circumstances, the law demands restraint. The Harrington Park case stands as a clear contrast to American home defense doctrines, highlighting how proportionality and necessity shape the legal outcome when an intruder dies during a struggle. The first case is Derek Ephraim Condon, a 39-year-old intruder in rural Idaho. Night. It is just after 2 in the morning in Bingham County, Idaho, in March 2024. 85-year-old Christine Janayan and her adult disabled son are asleep when 39-year-old Derek Condon forces his way into their home. Neighbors later say the house is on a quiet rural lane and the entry surprised everyone involved. Forced entry. Condon reportedly kicked in a door and moved through the house. He arrived with no known lawful reason to be inside and confronted the occupants. The intruder carried items that suggested he intended to search rooms and remove property. His presence and the way he entered immediately raised the level of danger for the residents. Confrontation. The homeowner and her son woke and called out, and the situation escalated quickly. The homeowner retrieved a firearm and confronted the intruder in the house. According to reports, shots were fired during the encounter. The intruder did not survive the confrontation at the scene. Investigation. Deputies arrived and secured the scene, treating the case as a defensive shooting while they gathered statements and evidence. Authorities interviewed the homeowners and collected forensic information from the entry points and interior. There were no immediate criminal charges against the residents as detectives worked to establish the sequence of events. By the time deputies arrived, the intruder was dead, and investigators treated the shooting as self-defense. The next case is D'Angelo Murphy, a 29-year-old intruder in Gulfport, Mississippi. Night. The incident occurred in December 2025 at a residence in Gulfport late at night. D'Angelo Murphy was reportedly subject to a protective order involving a household member prior to the break-in. The home contained a partner who had sought legal protection and who was inside when Murphy arrived. Entry and threats. Murphy is accused of forcing entry and ignoring the existing protective order. Witnesses describe him attempting to gain control of rooms and making threats that alarmed the resident. He arrived with tools and reportedly attempted to take or damage property while confronting the occupant. Those actions prompted an immediate defensive response from inside the home. Defense. The resident called authorities and then confronted Murphy as he moved through the house. A single defensive gunshot ended the intrusion and emergency services were called. Officers and paramedics arrived and found Murphy unresponsive. He was later pronounced dead shortly after first responders rendered aid. Legal response. Local law enforcement opened a homicide investigation while simultaneously noting the protective order as a relevant factor in their assessment. Authorities interviewed both the resident and neighbors and reviewed any available camera footage. Prosecutors were provided the preliminary information while investigators completed their work. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but he died soon after from his wounds. The next case is Rodney Lee Martin, a 41-year-old burglar in rural California. Rural night. The event took place near Modesto on July 2, 2021, in a rural residential area. Rodney Lee Martin was reported to be attempting a burglary on a property occupied by a homeowner who was awake and alert to movement outside. The remote location contributed to a fast escalation when the intrusion was noticed. Force and firearms. Martin approached and attempted to break in through an exterior door. The homeowner armed themselves and confronted Martin as he entered. Both men exchanged gunfire during the struggle inside or near the entry. The exchange produced fatal results for the intruder. Aftermath of the struggle. The homeowner sustained injuries in the exchange and required attention. Deputies arrived soon after and found Martin deceased at the scene. Investigators recovered shell casings and took statements from the homeowner and any witnesses. The case was treated as a shooting during an attempted break-in. Legal follow-up. The sheriff's office opened a homicide file and processed the scene, while prosecutors reviewed evidence to determine whether the homeowner acted in lawful self-defense. Neighbors described the area as isolated and said the homeowner had acted to protect the property. The intruder was pronounced dead at the scene, and investigators said both men had fired during the confrontation. The next case is Pearl Fierro, a 32-year-old woman who smashed her way into a Modesto home. Early morning. On June 29, 2021, Pearl Fierro reportedly forced entry into a Modesto residence in the early morning hours. The homeowner was inside alone and heard the sounds of breaking glass and forced entry. The situation escalated as Fierro moved through the home. Forced entry with intent. Fierro smashed a door or window to get inside and confronted the occupant. She carried items and seemed intent on confronting or robbing the resident. The intruder's behavior was aggressive enough that the homeowner perceived an immediate threat. Actions taken by Fierro left little opportunity for de-escalation. Defensive action. The homeowner retrieved a firearm and issued verbal warnings before firing a single shot. That shot stopped the intrusion, and emergency services were called. Officers found the intruder unresponsive, and medical teams pronounced her dead at the scene. The resident cooperated with investigators and provided a statement describing the threat they perceived. Investigation and outcome. The police treated the incident as an owner defense case and collected evidence from the point of entry and interior. County prosecutors reviewed the case and statements from neighbors and officials. The dead intruder remained the focus of a homicide investigation as authorities established the facts. She died at the scene, and investigators described the shooting as a defensive use of force while the inquiry continued. The next case is Jorge Nestevan Flores Toledo, a 28-year-old intruder in Lakewood Ranch in Bradenton, Florida. Holiday incident. On December 26, 2024, family members were at home in Lakewood Ranch when Jorge Nestevan Flores Toledo tried to enter. The break-in happened in the late afternoon at a residence that was occupied by a family. The timing, during a holiday period, heightened the alarm for those inside. Method of entry. Flores Toledo allegedly forced open a side door and moved toward interior rooms. Residents report that he was intent on taking items, and confrontations followed as he encountered people in the house. The intruder was described as aggressive and unwilling to leave when warned. That behavior prompted a defensive reaction, confrontation, and medical response. A family member confronted Flores Toledo, and shots were fired during the encounter. Paramedics were called immediately and took him to a nearby hospital for treatment. Despite attempts to save his life, he died shortly after arrival. The householder remained at the scene to speak with investigators. Investigation. Local law enforcement cordoned off the property and treated the event as a homicide while collecting statements and looking for surveillance footage. Prosecutors were briefed as detectives worked through witness accounts and medical reports. The intruder was taken to hospital but died soon after from his wounds. The next case is Abednego Audrey, a 30-year-old intruder in Granada Hills, Los Angeles, California. Nighttime. In December 2023, authorities responded to a report of a man attempting to enter a Granada Hills home late at night. Abednego Audrey had a history that included at least one protective order involving a household member. The resident who was being protected was inside when the intrusion occurred. Attempted entry. Audrey tried to force his way past a locked door and into the home. He ignored warnings and pushed into the entry area, creating a direct threat to the occupant. The homeowner perceived an imminent danger to themselves and any other people in the house. That assessment led to a defensive escalation, defensive response. The homeowner fired a single shot that stopped the intruder. Emergency personnel were called and found Audrey unresponsive at the scene. Police took custody of the scene and interviewed the resident about the sequence of events. The intruder did not survive the encounter. Legal context. Investigators noted the prior protective order as part of their review and treated the incident as a defensive shooting pending further examination. The district attorney's office reviewed the evidence to determine whether charges were warranted. Neighbors reported concern and noted the stressful history between the parties. He died at the scene, and the matter proceeded through the usual investigative steps. The next case is Jensen Rojas Marrero, a 27-year-old intruder in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Late evening. In September 2019, Jensen Rojas Marrero attempted to enter a private residence in Fayetteville late at night. The homeowner was present and immediately aware of the unauthorized entry. The situation escalated within minutes as the intruder moved through the property. Break-in and escalation. Rojas Marrero forced open an exterior door and confronted people inside. The homeowner warned him and attempted to get others to safety. When the intruder advanced, the homeowner used a firearm in defense. Shots were fired and the intruder was struck during the encounter. Response and medical care. Emergency services were summoned and firefighters and paramedics worked on scene. Rojas Marrero was transported to a hospital but did not survive. Law enforcement collected evidence and spoke to the homeowner and nearby witnesses. The shooting was treated as a serious criminal incident while detectives established the facts. Legal review. Investigators forwarded their findings to prosecutors for review and noted the homeowner's account of defending themselves and others in the home. Community reaction included debate about home defense and the risks of confrontations. He died at the hospital and the case remained under formal inquiry. The next case is Shelby Hurd, a 34-year-old intruder in Joliet, Illinois. Evening. On August 15, 2025, Shelby Hurd reportedly attempted a break-in at a Joliet residence in the evening hours. Heard had prior convictions for burglary and had recently been released on parole, according to public records. The homeowner was inside with family members when Heard arrived. Forced entry and intent. Heard attempted to gain entry by forcing a door and was seen trying to move inside the residence. The homeowner confronted Heard and warned him to leave while calling emergency services. Heard did not retreat and continued to advance toward the occupants. Defensive action and result. The homeowner fired a single defensive shot that stopped Heard during the intrusion. Police and paramedics were dispatched and found Heard unresponsive at the scene. Investigators took witness statements and documented prior criminal history as part of their review. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigation and context. The sheriff's office opened a homicide investigation and noted the suspect's criminal record and recent parole status as background information. State prosecutors reviewed the circumstances to determine whether state law supported the homeowner's account of self-defense. Local reporting emphasized the prior convictions as part of the wider public conversation. He was pronounced dead at the scene, and investigators described the shooting as a defensive response while inquiries continued. The next case is the Milwaukee shower intruder, an unnamed intruder in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Home invasion. In August 2022, a Milwaukee resident discovered an unknown person inside their home, in a bathroom, during the evening. The intruder had entered without permission and was located by the homeowner while the homeowner was at home. The unexpected intimate proximity of the intruder alarmed the occupant. Confrontation in a bathroom. The intruder was confronted in or near the shower area and refused to leave when the homeowner issued warnings. The homeowner retrieved a firearm to protect themselves and any family members nearby. A defensive shot was fired in the small, enclosed space, and the intruder fell. Emergency response. Neighbors and first responders were called and police secured the residence. Paramedics arrived and attempted life-saving measures, but the intruder died at the scene. Officers took statements from the homeowner and neighbors and collected the entry point evidence. The scene was processed as a homicide investigation. Legal outcome. Milwaukee police said they would review all available video and witness material and work with prosecutors to determine whether the homeowner acted lawfully. The homeowner cooperated with the investigation and described reacting to an immediate threat in the home. The intruder was found dead at the scene, and investigators treated the shooting as a defensive incident while the investigation proceeded. The next case is the Harrington Park intruder, an unnamed intruder in Harrington Park, Sydney, Australia. Early morning struggle. In February 2019, an intruder attempted to enter a home in the Harrington Park area of Sydney. The resident and the intruder became involved in a physical struggle inside the property. The confrontation was intense, and neighbors reported hearing shouting and banging, physical encounter. The intruder did not gain full control of the house but engaged the resident in a close-quarters fight. The resident fought back in self-defense, and at some point the intruder collapsed. Local emergency services were called and police secured the property for investigation, medical response, and inquest. Paramedics attended and declared the intruder deceased at the scene. Because the incident occurred in Australia, authorities launched a coronial inquiry and a criminal investigation to determine the exact sequence and whether any criminal charges were warranted. The struggle left the residents shaken and the community debating the risks of violent break-ins. Investigation result. New South Wales authorities proceeded with a coronial process and a standard inquiry into the death, while police gathered witness statements and forensic evidence. The intruder died at the scene, and the matter entered the formal review systems used in Australia for sudden deaths. Closing reflection. Tonight, 1 in 4 Americans say they worry about home break-ins, yet most will never face that test. In each of these stories, an intruder entered a private home, often at night, frequently while armed or threatening violence. Ordinary people were suddenly forced to make rapid decisions about safety, and in every case, the break-in ended with the intruder dead and families left to cope with trauma and legal questions. These incidents raised difficult questions about self-defense, home protection, and the balance of rights and risks in a home invasion. What would you do if someone forced their way into your home?